Hello everybody, welcome back to Punk Riot. My name is Smee. Today's episode is about character and character description. As I sit down and I'm writing my second novel, I kind of have a different plan about how I want to run my characters. If you're interested in learning a little bit how to make your planning a little bit easier, stick around here on Punk Riot. We'll be right back. The best stories are always stories that are driven by characters. And I think the hardest part as a writer is trying to figure out how your character is the best lie that you can possibly make. That's the funny thing that we do when we sit down and write fiction, because fiction is some invented idea that we have and pull from our brains, yet the best fiction is always the most truthful fiction. So how do you make your characters believable, not just for your readers, but most importantly for you as a writer? As I sit down and I start writing my second novel, I try to come up with a plan to help me figure out how I can know my characters a little bit better, so that when I write them in situations that I put them in, their actions and reactions are natural and fluid. Not just in terms of their own personal motives, but also how they act between characters. The only way to do this is to really internalize the character for yourself as an author. And we have to become a bit schizophrenic's not the right word. I guess maybe multiple personality, without any offense, of course, to the medical profession. We have to be able to jump back and forth between characters in the moment to be able to receive the dialogue or receive the action so that their actions and reactions spawn naturally. If you're trying to write a little bit of a longer piece and you have multiple characters, I might suggest writing out full character descriptions, which is what I'm doing for my second novel. Take a look here. There are a couple of areas that I look at in particular to figure out how can I have the most developed character. I spend a little bit of time and I just simply write out the physical descriptions. What do they look like? How they move, how they dress, any kind of notable marks on their skin, how they wear their hair, what they put on their head. Physical descriptions also define how we, as the reader, imagine these characters. Once I have that in mind, it kind of gives me an understanding of how that character moves through that world. On the second level, of course, are their emotional cues and their personality. And these two aspects play into each other because it defines very much how they're going to react to situations and what is going to give them some sort of impetus for their movement throughout that story. Inclusive in this is also the relationships with other characters. Their personality, as it comes into this cauldron of action, is going to define how that story evolves and moves. Particularly if you're a pantser, it's not a bad idea to sit down and write things out with a little bit of clarity. The relationships are hugely important. You'll find that a lot of important space and information in your story is simply brought out by understanding how characters act between themselves, how they talk about each other, how they think about each other. But the motives for why they're doing this is important from the offset, and as an author, it's important for you to have that in mind before you even sit down to start writing. The motivation and desires are very complex aspects of storytelling. Why do characters do what they do? Why do they act as they do? Why are those responses coming forward? And those, having that in mind, by clear descriptions, is going to give you a clear idea of your character's movements through your stories. Have that internalized. If you don't, then you're going to struggle through the writing process. And lastly are the beginning of your character arcs. In all great stories, your characters are going to change in multiple ways. They might have physical changes, they might have emotional changes, intellectual changes. All of that is implied through the beginning of some sort of weakness and flaw and strengths that allow them to overcome those limitations in their own being. Clearly outline the limitations and the flaws, and that's going to help you understand, where is my character going? How can they be supported with other characters, and how can they overcome their own limitations? So I will sit down before I even start writing out any of the plot lines or the movements of the story by understanding who my characters are and writing out full descriptions for those characters. If I do that first, I understand that once I'm put into scenes and I put those characters into scenes, how they move and why they move through those scenes is already established in my own head as an author. I don't have to think or create as much. They become people that are active in the story, and you'll find that the thing actually writes itself. And that's fun. Well, that's it for this week's episode of Punk Write. And remember, if you found this episode a little bit helpful, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Come back and join us every week. You don't need permission. Just write. Punk Write.